Do you know how Su Xian, the husband of the white snake, decided on the fate of the white snake, as asked by Fa Hai after he subdued the white snake in the well-known Chinese novel, The Legend of the White Snake? He skinned me to make the umbrella canopy, and made the umbrella ribs from my long bone. A few days ago, Su Northland received a delivery. After opening it, he found that it was a keepsake from his grandfather sent by his younger aunt. As soon as the package was opened, he smelled a strong musty odor. It was an old oil paper umbrella. Su Northland remembers that when he was a child, his grandfather always kept this oil paper umbrella hidden in a large camphor-wood box and never allowed anyone to touch it. The more it was forbidden, the more he wanted to sneak a peek at it. Perhaps his aunt thought he liked the umbrella, which is why she sent it to him. However, he really didn't want the umbrella, especially since his room was already messy enough. Moreover, the umbrella looked worn out, and he estimated that it would fall apart if opened. Just as he was hesitating whether to throw it away outright, he remembered that the umbrella seemed to have some history to it. He might as well take it to the silent house and show it to the boss. He temporarily covered the umbrella with a plastic bag and put it away. But as soon as he got busy with work, he completely forgot about the umbrella. On that day, he returned from the team-building trip and brought local products to the silent house boss. When he mentioned going to Gold Mountain Temple, an old monk inexplicably handed him a package of realgar. The boss became interested and asked him about the package of realgar. Su Northland has not yet realized the importance of the matter. He slammed on the table and said, "Of course, I just casually tossed it aside. Bro, I'm not Su Xian. Why would I need realgar?" The boss' eyes turned sharp. He remembered that Su Northland would soon be turning 25. He asked Su Northland if they had recently received anything strange. Isn't it strange that Su Northland has been thinking about realgar? The boss reminded him to have an umbrella or something similar. He then remembered the oil paper umbrella his younger sister had sent him. Could there be something wrong with this umbrella? The boss looked serious and asked him if he knew The Legend of the White Snake. At that time, Su Xian met Madame White Snake by lending her an oil paper umbrella at the broken bridge on West Lake. Unexpectedly, the umbrella ended up in the hands of Su Northland. He sympathetically looked at Su Northland and asked him, "Did you ever think about why the monk only gave you realgar? Could it be that Snake Beauty has already appeared by his side, but he has not noticed anything unusual?" The boss said it's normal, though the oil paper umbrella attracted the obsession of White Snake. She now has a cultivation level of 2,000 years, as the snake spirit Su Northland. It would be strange if he could recognize her. Upon hearing this, Su Northland panicked and quickly said, "Can I return the broken umbrella to her?" But the boss speculated that the white snake should have come back for revenge. Legend has it that during the Dragon Boat Festival, Su Xian fed the white snake realgar wine, causing Fa Hai to trap the white snake under Thunder Peak Tower. After that, Su Xian quickly married another woman to have children, leaving the white snake full of resentment. Before that, the umbrella should have been stored in a camphor-wood box. The camphor-wood box can repel insects and snakes, and its special scent makes the white snake unable to sense the presence of the oil paper umbrella. So, for all these years, everything has been fine. This time, the white snake umbrella has resurfaced. Whoever is the owner of this umbrella will have to bear her wrath. Upon learning the whole story, Su Northland hurriedly asked the boss if there was any realgar. But instead, the boss counter-questioned, "Do you think realgar alone can suppress the snake spirit cultivated for 2,000 years?" Su Xian used realgar wine to force Madame White Snake to reveal her true form because it was chosen at the exact time of the Dragon Boat Festival, the weakest moment of White Snake's cultivation. Now, it's almost the end of the year. No matter how much realgar you prepare, it's useless. Upon hearing this, Su Northland quickly asked the boss what he should do next. The boss reached out and picked up the longevity lock hanging on his neck. Su Northland thought the boss was making fun of her. He scratched his head and said awkwardly, The fortune teller said that he would face a great calamity at the age of 24. Therefore, his family instructed him not to remove this longevity lock before he turns 25. The boss did not respond, just quietly gazed at this lock. This was his first close encounter with the boss. Sue Northland couldn't help but size up the boss. He noticed a scar on his neck. After a moment, the boss finally let go and revealed the way to break the longevity lock. In fact, avoiding the white snake's revenge is also easy. 1,000 years ago, Fahai cursed her so that she couldn't harm living beings. The fateful entanglement between Su Xian and Madam White Snake began with borrowing an umbrella, so as long as she is not allowed to borrow an umbrella, it will be fine. Sue Northland was stunned for a moment. Is it that simple? The boss explained that umbrellas are used to shelter from rain, which is rootless water. Although it benefits all things by nourishing them, being drenched in rain can allow cold to enter the body. Therefore, umbrellas were invented to protect the body from being disturbed by cold chi on rainy days. Snakes, on the other hand, enjoy moisture and have long been known as little dragons. Rainy days are when their energy flourishes. So, what she needs may not necessarily be an all-paper umbrella, as long as it's the umbrella in your hand. By lending her your umbrella, it's like lending her something that protects you. She can take advantage of the rain to invade your body and devour your soul. Suddenly, Sue Northland remembered that they still had to go back on duty today, so they hurriedly bid farewell to the boss. Before leaving, the boss reminded Sue Northland once again that the white snake has a strong ability to transform into human form, so they must remember not to lend the umbrella to anyone. Sue Northland casually agreed. Then he returned to the hospital for duty. Unexpectedly, it started pouring rain heavily from the sky. And the rain is expected to last for a week. This is simply pushing him onto a dead end. He thought about just not bringing an umbrella and getting soaked on the way home this week. But at this moment, Brother Spring suddenly came in. He picked up the umbrella on his desk and was about to borrow it. Fortunately, Sue Northland quickly grabbed the umbrella back. He has just seen Brother Spring off. He then saw the new intern Ymira. Ymira happened to not bring an umbrella and wanted to borrow one from Sue Northland so that the girl wouldn't get wet in the rain. Sue Northland couldn't bear it, so he came up with a foolproof solution. He planned to share an umbrella with Ymira to walk her home, so technically it wouldn't be considered borrowing an umbrella, right? But he failed to notice the triumphant smile on Ymira's face. After successfully walking his junior sister home, Sue Northland is still feeling relieved that nothing happened. But the next day, he found out. Ymira worked overtime with Brother Spring to attend the surgery last night. He immediately felt weak in the legs and sat paralyzed on the ground. Since Ymira is here, who is the woman he sent home last night? So from that day on, Sue Northland simply didn't bring an umbrella to go to and from work. When passing by the entrance of the silent house, he discovered that the usually unlocked silent house had actually been closed for several days in a row. 5 days later will be Sue Northland's birthday. When he was carrying the umbrella borrowed from a colleague, ready to go home to change clothes and celebrate, he unexpectedly met the boss on the way. The boss immediately approached him and asked to borrow the umbrella. Sue Northland completely let down his guard and just handed over the umbrella. He then noticed that the boss's neck wound was gone. He hurriedly withdrew his hand. He questioned the person in front of him about their true identity. The person smiled slightly and cast a spell, causing Sue Northland to see the umbrella in his hand as a snake. He was so scared that he quickly threw the umbrella away. White Snake finally revealed her true form after catching the umbrella. She asked where the White Snake umbrella was in the Northland of Sue. At this time, the surrounding environment also turned into a wilderness. Accompanied by the rumble of thunderstorms, White Snake revealed her beastly form and opened her bloody mouth towards Sue Northland. She once again demanded to know where he hid the umbrella. At that moment, Su Northland thought of what the older generations in his family had said, that he would face a great calamity at the age of 24. Could this be what they meant, being devoured by a 1,000-year-old white snake? Just as White Snake was about to swallow Su Northland. At a critical moment, the boss suddenly appeared and stood in front of Su Northland. He used the White Snake umbrella to block White Snake's attack. White Snake's sharp fangs ripped through the boss's shirt in an instant. Only then did the boss turn around to inspect the situation in Su Northland. Fortunately, 5 days ago, he broke into Su Northland's home and secretly took away the White Snake umbrella. Otherwise, it might have fallen into the hands of the White Snake long ago. Later, Su Northland handed over full authority on the matter to the boss to handle. I hope he can also take care of the huge White Snake in front of him in passing. But this matter is not so simple. The boss turned and asked Su Northland, "Do you know why the legend of the White Snake doesn't have a final ending?" Su Northland was puzzled. Isn't the final ending when the White Snake is trapped under Thunder Peak Tower, and then the tower collapses, but she reappears in front of us later? The boss narrated calmly, "The White Snake has cultivated for 1,000 years, and can already control the wind and rain. She is a have-long. Once she goes through the love tribulation, she can transform into a long and ascend to the heavens, becoming a revered long god. In fact, even though she didn't have the form of a long back then, she already had long bone. However, Fahai, with his talisman, identified her as a snake spirit and trapped her under Thunder Peak Tower." When Fahai asked Su Xian how to handle it, do you know how Su Xian decided? He actually skinned the White Snake to make an umbrella canopy, and used her long bone to make the umbrella ribs. White Snake's real name isn't White Sujan, but White Dew. The boss advises White Dew to wait one more day, and her resentment will dissipate. Reincarnating as a person in the next life will be much better than wandering in this world. But White Dew insists on having the White Snake umbrella. Then dissolved her skin and burned her bones. Her soul can forever wander in the world. Forever and ever find Su Xian's reincarnation. She wants to see him face retribution, impoverished, ruined, and perished. White Dew forces the boss to hand over the umbrella, otherwise she can't guarantee what action she will take. The boss had no choice but to hand the umbrella over to her. White Dew took the umbrella and opened it in the rain. The leather on top dissolved quickly in the water. But her beautiful and sad appearance does not seem like she is going to face millions of years of loneliness. The scene in front of her is more like her standing by the misty West Lake Broken Bridge, waiting proudly and stubbornly for her lover. The reeds grow thick and green. White Dew turns to Frust unseen. The one I yearn for, pure and fair, dwells beyond the waters there. If this longevity lock is in perfect condition, I won't just exchange it for this villa, I'll exchange it for 2 villas with you. Even if you add all the treasures in your villa, they still can't compare to this longevity lock. What? Do you know why this longevity lock is worth more than 2 villas worth hundreds of millions? Legend has it that the longevity lock can protect babies from disasters and evil spirits, locking their lives. That's why many babies wear longevity locks from birth until adulthood. 24 years ago, a woman in the hospital, who had a hard life, went into premature labor after being shocked by the news that her husband was killed by a wealthy second generation. Her only child was also diagnosed with congenital heart disease, and had little time left. Just when she felt desperate and helpless, the appearance of a young man with red pupils completely changed the fate of the mother and son. The young man with red pupils took out the legendary longevity lock and told the woman that she could use her remaining 12 years of life to lock her child's life for 12 years. When the child is 12 years old, the lock will break and the person will die. That's why this longevity lock is also called the life debt lock. But a woman wants her son to live longer. For this, she is willing to endure the torment of hell. The boy agreed, but he could only extend the child's life by double. By the time the child turned 24, he would take back the longevity lock. Soon, 24 years passed, and that child had also grown up. That child is now the Dr. Su Northland. On his 25th birthday, he received an oil paper umbrella sent by his aunt. He faced retaliation from a 1,000-year-old white snake. Fortunately, the boss of the silent house appeared in time to help him ward off the disaster. But he was startled when the boss suddenly coughed up blood afterwards. Without saying a word, he immediately wanted to take the boss to the hospital for examination. But the boss insisted that he was fine. As long as he can safely get through today, that's all that matters. Su Northland was also confused when hearing this, without time to ask for clarification. The next moment, the red string around his neck suddenly broke. The longevity lock that had been worn since childhood fell to the ground and cracked open with a bang sound. Su Northland's brain was buzzing. Longevity lock is the keepsake left by his mother. His family has always reminded him not to take it off since he was young. But the boss asked him how he felt. Su Northland, who had always been slow to react, naturally had no feelings. However, the boss was even more anxious than him to fix the longevity lock. Then the two of them arrived in front of a luxurious villa. They were visiting the bald master of the collecting world. The boss wanted to ask him to help fix the lock. The bald man kept declining because he would charge others for fixing antiques, but the antiques the boss brought always cost him a strand of hair each time. Look at his head, there are hardly any hairs left. The boss had no choice but to ask him to take a look first. The bald guy was stunned after just one glance. He exploded on the spot after repeatedly checking and shouted, "This is a calamity! Who broke this longevity lock?" He then rushed over ferociously, ready to teach Su Northland a lesson. "Do you know that this jade can be exchanged for my house? How could you accidentally break it?" Su Northland suddenly felt the weight on his neck. He couldn't believe that the longevity lock he had been wearing for over 20 years was worth a villa. He regretted not knowing earlier, or he would have exchanged it long ago. Baldy boasted that his house is located in the most prime area of the city. He even used a piece of Song Dynasty porcelain to have a renowned designer personally work on it. It's practically a piece of art. Even if this longevity lock was carved by the master Lu Zigong, he would still offer this price. Su Northland was very curious after hearing that. How did he know who the author was when there was no inscription on the longevity lock? Is this Lu Zigong very famous? The more the bald guy looks down on him, this kid doesn't even know who Lu Zigong is. Lu Zigong is the most famous jade carving master of the late Ming dynasty, and each of his works is signed. On the back of this longevity lock, his name, Zigong, is carved within the lotus pattern. It's a pity that this person is too stubborn. He added his own name to the head of the dragon he engraved for the emperor. The enraged emperor was thunderously furious. Unfortunately, he was killed. The bald man touched the longevity lock in his hand and found that the jade was shining brightly and lustrous, without a hint of earthiness. He judged that this jade had been stored for at least 200 to 300 years. He quickly asked Su Northland where this thing came from. Su Northland truthfully answered that this was a relic left by his mother. His grandfather said that he was born prematurely, and his mother begged a gentleman for this lock to be worn close to him. She instructed that it should not be taken off for 24 years. Unexpectedly, it broke into 2 halves today. Once this was said, he was hit hard by the bald man again. "You fool! Don't you know that jade should not be worn close to the body, let alone exposed to chemicals like soap?" However, the bald man quickly realized that if this longevity lock had been worn close to the body for 24 years and still looked so smooth and hydrated, it meant that this jade had been buried for over 100 years, maybe even longer, before it was carved. So he began to re-examine this jade pendant, at first only focusing on the craftsmanship of the longevity lock without realizing that the quality of the material was also excellent. Baldy let out a long sigh. If this longevity lock were in perfect condition, I would trade it for not just 1 villa, but 2 with you. At this moment, the boss spoke up, saying that even if he added all the collectibles in his villa, they would not be worth as much as this longevity lock. Bald, his face full of disbelief. The boss and his family are old friends. His grandfather is even a close friend. Over the years, the boss hasn't changed in appearance at all. It is known that he is not an ordinary person. When he said this piece of jade is special, it must have extraordinary qualities. So the bald guy cautiously asked, "Boss, don't tell me this longevity lock belongs to Jiabaoyu? The characters on it don't match either." The boss calmly replied, "The spiritual Baoyu is not an ordinary item. It won't easily break, and it will seek its destined owner on its own. The jade material in your hand comes from the same piece as the Heshur jade. It is the leftover material from carving the Heshur jade. The Heshur jade is from the spring and autumn and warring states periods. The jade carving master Bien, he discovered it on Jing Mountain. Originally unknown, later experimented and named as the Heshur jade by King Wen of Chu, becoming a precious heirloom passed down through the spring and autumn and warring states periods, and after many ordeals eventually returned to Qin, where the first emperor of Qin had it made into the imperial jade seal. At the time of making the imperial heirloom jade seal, only 2 leftover jade pieces remained: one large, palm-sized piece of white jade resembling mutton fat, and one small piece the size of a finger, with a color resembling Qinglong water. The first emperor of Qin then gifted these 2 jade pieces to his son. The larger piece was gifted to the eldest son, Fu Su, and the smaller piece was gifted to the youngest son, Hu Hai. After the fall of Qin, the imperial heirloom jade seal passed to the Han dynasty. Whoever possessed the imperial heirloom jade seal held the world, as the saying goes. The Heshur jade continued to change hands among emperors until the Tang dynasty. During the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period when chaos reigned, the whereabouts of the circulated imperial jade seal became unknown. Thinking about this, the boss suddenly felt unwell and coughed up blood. But he was not in a hurry to see a doctor. Instead, he asked if the bald-headed man could fix locks. The bald-headed man was in a dilemma. If it were an ordinary jade, he would consider giving it a try. But now that the longevity lock is shattered, indicating that it had protected its owner from a calamity, it must not be worn again. It should be carefully wrapped in red cloth. Jade has spirituality, but it can also have evil aspects. Broken jade can easily attract negative entities. The boss took the longevity lock brought back by the bald man. He was about to leave when the bald man noticed that his clothes were torn. Although he couldn't help with the jade pendant, he could at least help repair the clothes. Without saying a word, the bald man took him to the workbench. But the bald man was just trying his hand. After all, his skills were not as good as his grandfather's. Maybe he couldn't repair this lifelike red dragon. But although the bald man said he was just going to repair it simply, but this chore took several hours. When he returned, Su Northland saw that the boss was in much better condition. Realizing it was getting late, Bald had brought the 2 of them back to the silent house. The boss finally breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the clock striking midnight, having helped Su Northland through the ordeal of turning 24. He lowered his head and found that the person leaning on him was actually unconscious. At this moment, Su Northland was equally at a loss. Just as he entered the silent house, he unexpectedly arrived in a vast white world. He walked forward and unexpectedly met the tall and mighty first emperor of Qin. The young man kneeling there. He looked surprisingly very familiar. At this time, the boss suddenly appeared from behind. Su Northland pointed at the young man in front of him and looked at the boss's face in astonishment. The boss voluntarily admitted that this child was him when he was young. He turned out to be the 12-year-old boy, Gan Luo, who, without moving a single soldier, took 6 cities for Qi in his youth. In official historical records, Gan Luo's date of birth is unknown. Logically speaking, even if Gan Luo, a nobleman of the Qin kingdom, passed away peacefully, there should still be some mention of him in the history of the Qin dynasty. However, This remarkable and extraordinary child prodigy passed through the court of the great Qin like a shooting star, disappearing in an instant without a trace. History also does not record the cause of Gan Luo's death. It turns out he didn't actually die. Although he was appointed as a high official, his merits from the mission to the Zhao kingdom were not enough to support his position. This decision was not a sudden whim of the first emperor, but rather a way to appease the old nobility of Qin. So, while he held the title of a high official, no one regarded him as one. The first emperor also seemed to have known early on that such a situation would occur. Shortly thereafter, he arranged for Gan Luo to become a study companion of Fu Su, the crown prince. This was actually a foundation prepared by the first emperor of Qin for Fu Su. If Crown Prince Fu Su ascended to the throne, then the hidden talent of Gan Luo will surely shine brightly in the history of the Qin dynasty. Unfortunately, the second emperor of Qin who eventually succeeded to the throne was not Fu Su, but his younger brother Huai. Fu Su was the first true imperial crown prince in China. No one would have expected that this gentle and jade-like young man would pass away at a young age. The one who must have felt the most about this should be Su Northland, looking at the boss lost in thought. He has lived alone for over 2,000 years, watching his relatives and friends die one by one, leaving himself wandering alone. The reason why the boss is in the antique business should be because those antiques, like him, possess long years, embodying deep historical significance. He watches as time changes everything, feeling like he is looking at someone's memories. The scene suddenly shifts to Jing Ke's assassination of the king of Qin. Seeing Jing Ke tragically killed in front of the hall, Su Northland asked the boss, "Do you think the first emperor of Qin was a tyrant?" The boss remained indifferent, and Crown Prince Dan said Jing Ke to assassinate the first emperor. Though the first emperor was nearly killed, when Qin conquered Yan, the lives of Yan kingdom's royal officials were spared. After the first emperor unified the 6 states, he did not slaughter cities or massacre the royal and noble elites from the 6 states. Instead, these people became the main force against Qin. If the first emperor was truly a tyrant, how did Liu Bang, a person from Chu, become an official and a descendant of the nobility of Chu kingdom? How did Xian Yu grow up smoothly? Hearing this, Su Northland is somewhat puzzled. You mentioned that the ones against Qin were the royal and noble elites of the 6 states, but I remember that the first to rebel were Chen Sheng and Wu Guang from Day's Township, who were both commoners. They rebelled because the labor levies imposed by the first emperor of Qin were too heavy. The boss still had a calm expression. Sima Qian of the Han dynasty mentioned that Chen Sheng and Wu Guang rebelled because the labor levies were delayed and they faced execution. However, recent discoveries of Qin bamboo slips state that punishments for delays of up to 5 days were just verbal warnings, and beyond that, only fines were imposed. While many say that the laws of the Qin dynasty were strict, the opposite is true. The laws of the Qin Empire already included provisions to protect criminals, a concept that would only appear in the Western world 2,000 years later. The records of the Grand Historian also recorded that the cases assigned by the first emperor of Qin went unsolved multiple times, which is unimaginable in later times. Under torture, even if the culprit could not be found, a scapegoat could be identified. This indicates that the Qin dynasty did not resort to severe torture to extract confessions. Compared to the countless miscarriages of justice in later dynasties, the Qin dynasty was already considered enlightened. At this time, Su Northland raised his hand to ask a question. Does it mean that the first emperor of Qin was a wise and heroic figure? An emperor without any flaws, right? Are those crimes fabricated then? What crimes are there to be told if the boss just smiles faintly? Su Northland said that the first emperor of Qin recklessly killed the innocent. The boss directly explained that the first emperor ruled for 37 years. He never killed a general or minister. In later generations, it was an unwavering practice to exterminate the previous dynasty once it had fallen. Even more extreme was the fact that, for those who needed to be eliminated within the current dynasty, they were also exterminated without mercy. Emperor Gozu of Han, Liu Bang, almost killed all his fellow rebels. But did anyone in later generations criticize Liu Bang as a tyrant? No, because those who hated him had all been completely eliminated. Even Sima Qian, when writing records of the Grand Historian, did not dare to speak indiscriminately. As for Emperor Wu of Han, Liu Che, he could easily discard all his years of hard work. At this time, Su Northland also thought about the first emperor of Qin, who was heavily criticized for major projects like the Great Wall, the Apang Palace, and the Li Mountain Mausoleum. But the boss countered, after the Qin dynasty unified the 6 states, what should be done with the remaining soldiers? Disarm and return to farming? Long periods of peace will lead to chaos. Either continue expanding externally or carry out massive construction projects. Throughout dynasties, like Emperor Wu of Han in later years, who repeatedly led military campaigns against the Xiongnu, ancestors of the Western Huns, as well as the Sui, Tang, Song, and Ming dynasties, without exception. Just like Kangxi of the Qin dynasty, who personally led military expeditions even during times of peace. This is a method to resolve internal conflicts. Upon hearing the boss's explanation, Su Northland suddenly saw the light and realized that this method has indeed been used from ancient times to the present. What war did a certain major country start nowadays in order to shift attention from its domestic economic crisis? And the boss continued by saying, let's not discuss the praises and criticisms of the Great Wall by future generations for now, but after the Qin dynasty, every dynasty would continue to build the Great Wall. Doesn't this fact alone show the importance of the Great Wall? The first emperor did not expand outward due to considering the welfare of the people. According to the unearthed Qin bamboo slips, the corvée labored during the Qin dynasty included providing meals, paying wages, and even distributing clothing. Do you think common people would rather go to war or work? At this point, Su Northland asked again, wasn't the first emperor of Qin known for burning books and burying scholars? The boss pointed to the main hall ahead and explained, here is the truth behind burning books and burying scholars. The catalyst for burning books and burying scholars was the first emperor's pursuit of immortality while fearing assassination by poison. Presenting him with a pill of immortality were the sorcerers. They were required to make 2 pills simultaneously. There were several attendants specifically designated to test the medicine. Wait for a month. Only if there are no abnormalities should you take the pills. Then one day, one of the attendants assigned to test the medicine suddenly dropped dead. Upon hearing this, Su Northland, who is a doctor, immediately understood that the ancient alchemy practices involve toxic heavy metals like mercury which, when accumulated in the body, can have severe side effects. Throughout history, many emperors died from taking elixirs in pursuit of immortality. The boss nodded in agreement. Yes, since no one knew from the beginning that the elixirs were inherently poisonous, it's impossible to determine which attendant died from consuming whose elixir. Furthermore, it was discovered that Ho Sheng, Lu Sheng, and others were corrupt, perverting the law for personal gain, recklessly spending money and fleeing with the funds. The first emperor decided to kill all the involved sorcerers, which in modern terms can be likened to defrauding research funds. 463 individuals were arrested with concrete evidence of their crimes, and each one was executed by beheading. This was actually the only incident of tricking the scholars, more accurately described as tricking the sorcerers. Sima Qian in the records of the Grand Historian also believed it was tricking the sorcerers. Through later generations' embellishments and exaggerations, it transformed into the story of tricking and killing numerous scholars. As for the burning of books, the recently discovered Qin bamboo slips still exist. If books were truly burned, how could there be a large number of Qin bamboo slips unearthed? The first emperor burned the books belonging to the nobles of the 6 states in order to erase their history and prevent unrest. However, he did not anticipate that his merciful act of burning books would not be able to stop their rebellious intentions. After listening to the boss's explanation, Su Northland was suddenly speechless and had nothing more to ask. He decided not to argue with the boss after all. There was no point in arguing, as he would not win. He quietly watched from the side instead. The scene quickly shifted to the scene of the first emperor of Qin interacting with two children. It is not difficult to see that the first emperor of Qin favors his younger son Hu Hai. But in fact, he is strict with Fu Su. He also wishes to pass the empire into his hands. But Fu Su is kind, righteous, and loyal. His governing philosophy is completely opposite to that of the first emperor of Qin. So he threw his son into the frontier to join the military. He intends to train him for several years. Only in this way can a resolute and courageous Fu Su be cultivated. And accompanying them is Gan Luo, who is also serving as a companion reader. Several years later, during the Eastern inspection tour, the first emperor suddenly died. Hu Hai and Zhao Gao then sent someone to the border to falsely spread an imperial order, blaming Fu Su for mismanagement. They ordered him and General Meng Tian to commit suicide. Fu Su discovered discrepancies in the decree. He is preparing to discuss with General Meng Tian. He was assassinated. The record ends here. Su Northland also returned to the silent house and asked the boss if what he had just seen was Fu Su's memory, right? The boss nodded and talked about what happened after Fu Su's tragic death. He started helping Liu Bang overthrow the Qin dynasty to avenge Fu Su. Since then, he has been searching for the reincarnation of Fu Su. But actually, he originally chose Xiang Yu, not Fu Su. He didn't expect that Xiang Yu would destroy Xianying, burn the Apang Palace, and kill all the royal members and ministers of the Qin dynasty. That's why he later turned to Liu Bang. This also led Su Northland to suspect involuntarily that he might be Han Xian, the military sage. After all, the guy in front of him has lived for more than 2,000 years. God knows what role he has played in history. So he asked the boss again if he found the reincarnation of Fu Su. The boss said he found it, but for some reason, Fu Su's reincarnation always dies young, at most living until the age of 12. He tried for a long time. He later found out that only by having Fu Su's reincarnation wear the jade pendant he always carried with him in the past could his life be extended. So he asked Lu Zhigang to carve this longevity lock, but even so, it can only help him live until the age of 24. Su Northland suspects that the boss may have got the wrong person this time. He is now well past 24 years old and still alive and well. The boss must not have made a mistake. He just recently learned about the soul of Fu Su Gongzi being trapped in jade before his death. In previous lifetimes, his soul was incomplete and he died early. But today, his lifespan has been prolonged, and the soul of Fu Su has been released. From now on, whether in this life or the next, he will be subject to the control of fate like an ordinary person. There will be no more premature deaths occurring. Upon hearing this, Su Northland then realized that the boss had coughed up blood again. The boss looked at Su Northland with relief and said, "You can finally live well. My mission has finally ended. It's time for me to rest." Do you know that the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor may not actually contain the remains of the first emperor of Qin? The first emperor was not buried in the luxurious mausoleum he had built during his lifetime. His remains have disappeared, and it is unknown where he was actually buried. I buried Fu Su on Li Mountain. He was unable to become the emperor of the great Qin Empire during his lifetime, but after his death, I let him have the 100,000 terracotta army underground. At this time, the boss is continuously coughing up blood. Su Northland wants to take him to the hospital, but the boss said he couldn't go. Su Northland asked the boss why. The boss didn't answer, which made him curious about how the boss has lived for so long. And will vomiting blood like this not affect his health? The boss looked genuinely concerned about his own Su Northland. He thought that even the master's family, spanning 3 generations, deliberately kept their distance from him because of his unchanged appearance over 100 years. Su Northland has only known him for 2 or 3 years, yet treats him like this. So he decided to tell Su Northland the secret he had been guarding for thousands of years. It turns out that the boss's master is an alchemist, but unlike those swindling sorcerers in the palace, his master relies on real skills. However, he didn't like to be constrained and left after a year in the palace. After the servant's sudden death during the alchemy experiment, the first emperor of Qin did not give up his pursuit of the elixir of immortality. Just changed it so that the alchemist himself would consume the elixir during the experiment. As the master of the boss had already ascended to the heavens, he had no choice but to have his disciple taste it. Su Northland felt his scalp tingle after hearing this story. There really is an elixir of immortality in this world. Could it be that ancient alchemy is even more powerful than modern medicine? But how did he manage to escape unharmed from under the hands of Hu Hai? The boss continued to tell how, before Hu Hai's emissary reached the border, his father had already noticed some clues and urgently sent a messenger with a letter, claiming to be seriously ill. But as soon as he entered the house, he was locked up in a secret chamber by his father. He was only released when the first emperor of Qin passed away, and he then found out that Lord Fu Su had already died, reportedly by suicide. However, he did not believe it, and was certain that Hu Hai was behind it, because the throne was originally supposed to belong to Lord Fu Su. Later, Hu Hai organized all the court officials to go to Li Mountain to hold a funeral for the first emperor. However, at the scene, he suddenly sent out archers to force all the officials to be buried alive. He also used this opportunity to get rid of the troublesome people in the court. When the boss woke up again, he found himself in the tomb of the first emperor of Qin, with the wound on his neck healed and no longer bleeding. However, looking around, he realized he was in hell. His father, who had endured silently all his life, died inexplicably. He carried his father's body out of the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor and laid him to rest in the family ancestral grave. He then went on non-stop to search for the tomb of Fu Su. He knew that the spies sent by Zhao Gao would definitely not bury him properly. So he searched incognito all the way until he finally found a burial mound near the border with no tombstone at all. He dug out Fu Su and brought him back to Li Mountain. The first emperor of Qin was not buried in the luxurious tomb he had built during his lifetime. His remains were not preserved. This is because his youngest son, Hu Hai, wanted the magnificent tomb for himself. The first emperor adored this son the most, and wished to give him the best of everything. However, he did not anticipate that his youngest son would hold control over the entire great Qin Empire that he had built single-handedly, including the resting place he had constructed for himself. Hu Hai took it without any hesitation. So the boss also decided to bury Fu Su here. Even though Fu Su did not become the emperor of the Great Qin during his lifetime, the boss wanted him to have a terracotta army of 10,000 soldiers underground after his death. Su Northland looked at the boss, who had been searching for 2,000 years, and couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you tired?" The boss said that he didn't realize he was immortal at first, but a few years later, he discovered that not only did his body not change in any way, but even injuries healed quickly. He then confirmed that he might have unknowingly consumed the immortal medicine made by his master. As a doctor, Su Northland is completely intrigued by immortality. Excitedly, he asked whether there are any differences in his body compared to ordinary people, and expressed a desire to conduct a comprehensive examination on him. But having lived for thousands of years, in fact, the boss has never stopped studying his own body. He knows the likely reasons without needing to undergo tests. He asked Su Northland what the cause of human aging is. Su Northland immediately replied that it is cellular aging. The renewal of human cells depends on the rate of division. When the division rate is slower than the rate of cell aging, the human body enters old age. But the boss said that there are exceptions to such cells. Cells that proliferate infinitely can become immortal everlasting cells. Su Northland was shocked. Could he be referring to cancer cells? But cancer cells can divide indefinitely. But the human body's organs can't handle it. Doesn't that accelerate the boss's death? The boss pointed to his own body's crimson long robe. The rest will depend on it. It turns out that this set of crimson long robe can suppress the number of times cancer cells divide, maintain a delicate balance of the body's cells, and prevent various organs from aging or failing. Since ancient times, there has been a saying that gold and jade emit a cold aura can keep the corpse from decaying. This fabric is made of black gold and black jade passed down from ancient times. Originally, the first emperor had prepared it for burial. The first emperor collected some ancient artifacts from the mythical era. However, in the subsequent dynasties, such divine artifacts became extremely rare, and many of them were replicas. For example, the golden thread jade burial suit found in Han tombs is actually a poor imitation. Su Northland curiously touched the fabric, indeed feeling a soft yet rigid texture, cold and piercing. It should have incorporated some rare metal, producing a faintly radioactive substance to keep the body from decaying. He took advantage of the guise of scientific research to take advantage of his boss. He really wanted to cut a piece off to take back for research. If he would just listen, the boss's 2,000-year-old heart would be even better. But his little trick was seen through by the boss with just one glance. At this moment, Su Northland suddenly realized that this clothing had the style of Zhongshan's suit. It shouldn't be the same design from 2,000 years ago, right? It turns out that during the Republic of China era, the boss saved the grandmother of the bald master. And his grandfather was a famous antique restorer at the time. They tailored their clothes into the most popular styles at the time as a way to reward themselves. It turned out that a few years later, those styles were no longer in fashion. Fortunately, it's not too strange to wear them like that now. It's still better than wearing antique costumes. At this moment, Su Northland noticed that the dragon on the crimson long robe appeared to be moving. The boss told him that this long on the crimson long robe was embroidered when the clothing was torn during the Song dynasty. He asked the people from the Institute of Literary and Embroidery Arts to help him repair it. Each line on this fabric has a specific arrangement, and the threads used were dyed with his blood. However, the repair was not perfect. In the past, it only moved once every few years, but now it moves once a day. It seems that this crimson long is eager to drink his blood. After speaking, the boss bit his finger and placed it on the head of the long. Indeed, the dragon started sucking his blood and began to move. Su Northland thought for a moment. This clothing may be a very sophisticated circuit board. As long as a few wires are crossed, it will short-circuit completely. But now that the clothing is torn, does that mean? Can you find someone else to embroider it? The boss mentioned that the Song dynasty was the peak of development for Suzhou embroidery. The court even established a specialized institute of literary and embroidery arts. The red long embroidered on my body was created using. The Institute of Literary and Embroidery Arts employed 37 embroidery artisans, and it took a full 2 years to complete. Do you think we can still find so many skilled embroidery artisans in this era? But Su Northland is unwilling to give up. There must be a way. Can't machine weaving work? The boss told him not to worry. He has lived long enough. Once Fusu's matter is resolved, he should rest. Su Northland suddenly understood that there was a way to repair the clothes. The boss had lost his will to live. He would not allow anyone to disregard his life like this. He grabbed the boss's shoulder and asked, "Fusu is your friend. What about me?" The boss nodded. "You are too. But my saving you and others is unrelated. You are a good doctor who can save more lives." Su Northland did not see himself as sufficient motivation and started using so many ancient artifacts in the silent house to speak. "Do you really have the heart to abandon them?" The boss said there is a curator. He will definitely take care of them. Su Northland is helpless. What else did the boss leave for them in memory? He suddenly remembered the boss said there were 2 life-prolonging pills. He ate one, then where is the other one? The boss asked in return, "Do you remember I was not around a few days ago?" Su Northland, he also remembered that day he encountered the museum curator. He said he exchanged a Warring States period alchemy tripod with the boss. This tripod belonged to the boss's master. There is a compartment at the bottom of the tripod where another elixir of immortality originally placed, which was intended for the first emperor of Qin to take after his eastern expedition. Ironically, he died on the way during the expedition. When the boss opened the alchemy tripod's compartment, it was already covered with green patina, indicating that the elixir had been taken away by someone 2,000 years ago. The only ones who could have access to this elixir were the attendants and Hu Hai. So he must have lived for over 2,000 years, just like Hu Hai. Su Northland could see that the boss harbored some resentment towards Hu Hai. As long as he's still alive, the boss won't feel at ease. It seems that the boss won't lose his will to survive in the short term anymore. The two of them had a lively conversation. Unconsciously, it's already morning. The boss has made up his mind. In order to continue the confrontation with Hu Hai, he probably needs to make a trip to Li Mountain first. Su Northland didn't say a word and took leave from the hospital to accompany him. He also bought many treasures related to tomb robbing online, and is ready to go dig at the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor at any time. The boss looked at the cloudless sky outside the window and asked Su Northland to take a rest. They will set off tonight. That night, Su Northland followed the boss along a mountain road for 3 hours and had not yet reached the destination. During the process, the boss kept looking at the stars to find their location. Su Northland could not help but sigh at the wisdom of the ancients. The world has undergone changes over 2,000 years, but the stars in the sky remain unchanged. Finally, the boss stopped at a certain place and told Su Northland that they had arrived at the entrance. However, they had to wait until midnight to enter. Su Northland was still worried, saying, "Isn't it said that the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor has many traps? Will it be dangerous?" But the boss said, "The main entrance of the underground palace has long been sealed. The other hidden entrances and exits of the underground palace have also been blocked by the boss." But the craftsmen who built the underground palace thought that they might be buried alive in the future, so they secretly dug a secret passage for emergency use. The midnight hour is approaching soon. The boss took out a dazzling pearl called Sueho Pearl. He stuffed it into a nondescript small hole in the rock wall. The bead unexpectedly reflected the moonlight, projecting a path, but the boss already knew where the craftsman's secret passage was. He intentionally made it so ceremonial. It's because 3 days ago, he learned from the museum director that the person who gave the Warring States period's black gold alchemy cauldron to him before. He is a young man with a low-brimmed hat, but he deliberately asked the museum director to take this cauldron to the silent house to exchange goods. The boss guessed it was Hu Hai. Is he still not giving up on the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor, deliberately luring himself over? The boss, accompanied by Su Northland, walked all the way into the underground palace. Just as they entered, Su Northland felt nauseous. The boss handed the Sueho Pearl to him. This thing has the effect of warding off evil and purifying. After receiving it, Su Northland indeed felt refreshed and invigorated. He followed the boss. The road was smooth and unobstructed all the way. But after going downhill, the boss reminded him that the next destination was the road to the underground palace. Remember to follow your own pace. Because the first emperor of Qin followed the ritual system of treating death as equal to life, the layout of the underground palace and the palace city before his death are exactly the same. Now they are going to enter from the subsidiary tomb passage, placing the coffin of the first emperor of Qin in the center of the underground palace. The other side halls are used to accommodate the deceased concubines and accompanying personnel, so the other tomb passages have never been completely sealed. But it's important to know that the size of the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor is equivalent to 76 forbidden cities. After walking for over an hour, Su Northland still didn't see any changes ahead, and even started to doubt if the boss had taken the wrong route. Fortunately, after another hour, he finally saw the exit. The sight of the terracotta army by the entrance startled him. Not only were their expressions lifelike, but even the bronze swords in their hands were real. They seemed to be alive, guarding this place for over 2,000 years. Su Northland felt scared by the gaze. He hurried to catch up with the boss's footsteps and entered the main hall. Here is exactly the same as the Qin Imperial Palace he saw in his dream. But everything is made of clay sculptures. Here is as quiet as a dead city. At this moment, the flashlight in Su Northland's hand suddenly ran out of battery. Isn't it said that the mausoleum of the first Qin Emperor has mermaid ointment? Is it the millennium-long eternal lamp made from it? Why is it still pitch black? At this moment, the boss took out a candle. Isn't this the mermaid candle from the Silent House? Su Northland is filled with 10,000 doubts in his mind. How did the boss manage to bring this thing onto the airplane? Two people continued to walk forward towards Su Northland and found the path to be unobstructed, with no traps at all. Upon asking, they found out that the boss had already dismantled the traps a long time ago, just to ensure that Fu Su, who was buried here, could safely come out when he woke up. It was evident that he still harbored a glimmer of hope that Fu Su would wake up. After the two entered the main hall, the candle in Su Northland's hand suddenly became hot. The next second, all mermaid eternal light candles automatically ignited. Su Northland finally saw how magnificent the room was. 3 mountains and 5 peaks made of gold, rivers and seas made of mercury. It turned out to be a proportional map of the Central Plains. Under the illumination of the eternal light, the entire palace was as bright as day. Su Northland climbed up to the center of the main hall with great difficulty, finally seeing the man, Fu Su, who had appeared in his dreams multiple times along with the boss. I didn't expect that in this underground palace, Fu Su's body is still the same after 2,000 years, looking more like a sleeping person than a corpse. Su Northland discovered that the clothing on his body is made of the same fabric as the one owned by the boss. If he wants to survive, he must change into the Fu Su clothing. But in that case, the unprotected Fu Su might completely disappear from this world. Su Northland is worried that the boss may not have the heart to do it. He was just about to reach out and strip Fu Su's clothes. He was then caught by the boss, who held his hand and said to wait a moment. But at this moment, the red dragon on the boss's body had already begun to feel restless, eroding him. Su Northland shook his hand and roared, "How much longer do we have to wait? Are you sure it's the longevity lock that binds his soul? Maybe it's because his physical body is indestructible that his soul remains." He took advantage of the boss's stupefaction. Su Northland pushed him aside and was about to approach Fu Su. But as his fingers were just about to touch Fu Su's body, it unexpectedly made a rustling sound and began to disappear. In the end, only one piece of clothing was left in the coffin. Su Northland looked baffled. He hasn't done anything yet. The boss explained that after all, it has been 2,000 years. The golden thread jade burial suit may be able to keep his body immortal. Mercury vapor can also keep its appearance from decay. But in the end, he still died. Su Northland picked up the robe and draped it over the boss. He persuaded the boss to put it on. He was also on the clothes. The boss finally put on the robe properly. He called Su Northland to help him close the coffin together. Before the coffin lid closed, the boss put the broken longevity lock inside. He is prepared to bid a final farewell to Master Fu Su. But at this moment, Su Northland suddenly realized. The red long on the boss's body kept wandering and climbed onto the robe. Su Northland quickly took out a small knife to cut the red thread, only to find it was to no avail. The boss advised him not to waste his effort. Ordinary swords cannot cut it. In the end, it was a miscalculation. It seems that he cannot escape from this red long. Suddenly, all the eternal lamps in the entire underground palace went out in an instant. Mermaid Candle said she just saw a person using a knife to touch the fire basin, and all the flames were sucked into the knife. The boss kissed right away. Besides Huhai, who is familiar with the mechanisms in the underground palace and can absorb flames using the resonant swan saber, Legend has it that when the Yellow Emperor was refining the Xianzhuan sword, there were still leftover materials. Due to the high temperature in the furnace that had not dissipated, the liquid casting material flowed to the bottom of the furnace and solidified into the shape of a saber. Without any external force, it makes a sound on its own and is named the resonant swan saber. The Yellow Emperor believed that the will of the resonant swan saber was too strong and could backlash against the wielder. He feared that the saber would fall into the human realm and planned to destroy it with a Xianyuan sword. However, the saber transformed into a scarlet-colored sparrow in his hands and flew away. Sure enough, not long after, a young man with silver hair appeared. He is the second emperor of Qin Huai. It seems that he turned his hair silver due to not having the gold-threaded jade garment to suppress the toxicity of the elixir of immortality. This time he must be aiming for the jade garment on the boss. As expected, without saying a word, Huai swiftly threw out the resonant swan saber and split the rope in half. He took away half. Seeing the situation was not good, the boss quickly took Su Northland and left first. They found that Huai had not caught up. Things don't seem to be as he imagined. Has Huai not given up the desire to be buried here? Later, Su Northland was taken to a safe place by the boss. The boss let him go out first, but turned back to rush back himself. He would never allow Huai to stay alone in this underground tomb. But Su Northland thought of the resonant swan saber in Huai's hand and was very worried about the boss's safety. He mustered up the courage and was prepared to chase back to help. He forgot that this is an underground palace with numerous traps. He had only taken one step when he stepped on a trap, and an arrow flew at him from the side. He almost lost his life, but fortunately the boss noticed the movement and came back in time. Su Northland grabbed his thighs. He tearfully begged the boss to still send him away. But the boss still couldn't rest assured with Huai staying there. Su Northland advised on the side. Even though this clothing has been cut in half by Huai, your upper body is still intact. You can still carry on living. Forget about the past. It's been over 2,000 years. The boss fell into contemplation. Can I really forget the past and start fresh to live on? I am just a ghost wandering around in this world for over 2,000 years. Nobody cares about whether I live or die. Just as the boss was hesitating, the underground palace suddenly shook. It's probably because Huai triggered some mechanism. After the earthquake, the secret passage has been sealed off by sand and rocks. Immediately after that, mechanical sounds could be heard. The terracotta army that was just seen in the tomb passage they passed through should have been activated. In fact, all the terracotta army figures are controlled by mechanical devices. Once they confirm the presence of intruders, they will automatically brandish their swords and launch attacks. As the group of Grim Reapers drew closer, the two still couldn't find a way to escape. Just as the terracotta army was about to brandish their swords at the boss, Su Northland stepped forward and stood in front. At a critical moment, they heard Sanqing shout and turned around to look. It actually created a rift in the space-time continuum. The boss picked up Su Northland and jumped in without saying a word. The two successfully returned to the dormitory. But they didn't expect that when they turned around, the terracotta army also appeared behind them. Fortunately, the boss knew his tricks. The terracotta army immediately stopped moving. It looks like we need to clear a room specifically to entertain this distinguished guest. Later, the boss handed over the half-golden thread jade burial suit brought back from Li Mountain to Master Guanto, who cut it into a shirt. The lingering malevolent spirit of the Red Long inadvertently attached itself to this new shirt. However, like entering a winter hibernation, it has remained unmoved ever since. Do you know how behind the sayings, "Keep the bow after the birds have flown," and "Spare the dog since the rabbit is already cooked"? There is a very realistic story. King Gojian of you can share hardships with others by enduring hardships